She pulled a frozen black Shoshone warrior from the ice 5 days later. He claimed her face in his vision. A chilling echo, a future etched in ice and ancient prophecy, whispered into the cold mountain air. How could a man from a forgotten age speak of her face, a face he had never seen, long before she even breathed? This was no mere coincidence, no strange delirium. This was a force that pulled at the threads of time itself, a harrowing destiny weaving through the unforgiving peaks. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The wind, a jagged whisper through the ancient pines, was her only companion for months, a constant, biting presence against the solitude of the high peaks. Ilara, her hands calloused, her face weathered by sun and frost, had sought refuge in the relentless wilderness, a place where the clamor of human judgment could not reach. She was a woman steeped in the bitter sediment of past mistakes, carrying the weight of a shattered life, the echo of choices that still clawed at her conscience. Her cabin, a rough-hewn sentinel against the vast indifference of the landscape, offered no warmth beyond the meager fire that fought valiantly against the encroaching cold. Each day was a testament to survival, a quiet, grueling battle against the elements that mirrored the war within her own spirit. She had come here to forget, to simply endure, believing that the harsh beauty of the mountains could somehow purify her, strip away the layers of regret. But the mountains, ancient and silent, held their own secrets, their own memories frozen beneath layers of ice and time. It was a late autumn morning, the air thick with the promise of early winter, when she ventured deeper into the shadowed canyon, following the faint tracks of a lone stag. The ice, a treacherous mirror, had already begun to claim the edges of the glacial lake, reflecting the bruised sky above. A glint, unnatural and sharp, caught her eye, something dark embedded within the milky heart of a newly exposed ice shelf, something that pulsed with an inexplicable gravity. Her breath hitched. It was a hand, dark-skinned and perfectly preserved, fingers slightly curled as if reaching. The sight stole the breath from her lungs, not with fear, but with a profound, unsettling awe. It wasn't merely a body. It was a figure, impossibly human, trapped within the crystalline tomb, a silent sentinel from a time that should have remained buried. A chill, deeper than the mountain air, seeped into her bones, a premonition of the impossible tale that was about to unfold, forever intertwining her desolate path with the frozen stillness of another's. The ice held him in a perfect, chilling embrace, a window into a past both immediate and impossibly distant, pulling her closer with an invisible, insistent tether. The discovery was an affront to the natural order, a jarring dissonance in the quiet symphony of her solitary life. Ilara stood for a long time, the biting wind tugging at her clothes, her gaze locked on the dark form entombed in the ice. The man's face, serene and unmarred, bore the proud lines of a warrior, his braided hair woven with what looked like ancient beads. His garments, though faded, spoke of a culture long vanished from these lands. A quiet dread coiled in her gut, a visceral understanding that this was no ordinary tragedy. To leave him would be a betrayal of a nascent, inexplicable connection. To retrieve him, an act of sheer, monumental impossibility. Yet, the deep current of her own fractured humanity, buried beneath layers of self-imposed isolation, stirred. She couldn't abandon him. The following hours bled into a grueling, almost feverish labor. With primitive tools, a borrowed axe, a sturdy rope, and the sheer force of desperation, she began to hack at the relentless ice. Each swing was a testament to a burgeoning obsession, a silent prayer against the immensity of the task. Her muscles screamed, her hands bled, but she worked with a fierce, unyielding resolve, driven by a nameless compulsion. The cracking of the ice echoed like a drumbeat in the desolate canyon, a rhythm of effort and profound vulnerability. The cold was a physical antagonist, numbing her limbs, creeping into her very marrow. Yet she pressed on, propelled by a desperate, almost irrational empathy. The world outside her immediate struggle ceased to exist. There was only the ice, the embedded warrior, and the unyielding will to free him. As the sun began its reluctant descent, painting the peaks in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, a substantial block of ice, containing the entire figure, finally broke free with a guttural groan. The weight was crushing, the task of transport daunting. But fueled by a potent blend of exhaustion and a strange, nascent hope, she rigged a makeshift sled, her mind racing with improvised solutions. The journey back to her cabin, dragging the frozen monolith through the deepening twilight, was a brutal, Herculean effort. A silent procession under the indifferent gaze of the rising stars. Each step was a testament to her profound isolation, a silent vow to this impossible burden, a haunting promise of the stranger who now lay, still, within her own small haven. Inside the meager warmth of her cabin, the massive block of ice, a testament to her desperate strength, sat like a strange, crystalline sarcophagus. The air around it was noticeably colder, tinged with the scent of ancient earth, and something indefinable, something that hummed with the mystery of ages. Alara, her body trembling with fatigue, her hands raw and bleeding, could only stare. The man within remained utterly still, perfectly preserved, his features caught in a timeless slumber. The initial awe began to give way to a creeping sense of bewilderment and a nascent, unsettling fear. What had she done? What ancient force had she disturbed by wrenching him from his icy tomb? Her rational mind screamed at the impossibility, at the sheer absurdity of her actions. Yet, a deeper current, one that had long been dormant, pulled her forward. She couldn't abandon him now. The process of thawing was a slow, deliberate agony, a delicate dance between warmth and preservation. She wrapped the block in thick furs, lit every lamp, and kept a low, steady fire in the hearth, watching the ice weep in slow, crystalline tears. Hours melted into days, marked only by the shifting patterns of light on the cabin floor and the relentless drip of water into the buckets she placed beneath the shrinking ice. She ate little, slept less, consumed by a vigilance born of both morbid curiosity and a profound, nascent responsibility. During those long hours, she studied his face, memorizing the proud curve of his nose, the strong set of his jaw, the faint scar above his brow. She imagined his life, piecing together fragments of a forgotten history from the few, precious artifacts visible beneath the diminishing ice. A leather armguard, a strange, intricately carved pendant at his neck. He was a silent presence, a haunting mirror reflecting her own profound solitude. And then, on the third day, a subtle tremor, so faint, she almost dismissed it as a trick of her exhausted vision. But then, a definite, almost imperceptible twitch of his fingers, followed by a shallow, rattling gasp that fractured the profound silence. A gasp that was not quite human, but undeniably a sign of life. Her heart leaped, a wild bird trapped in her chest. Hope, raw and fragile, pierced through the layers of her weary cynicism. He was alive. The impossible had just taken its first, shuddering breath. The silence of the cabin was no longer absolute, but held the quiet, fragile promise of a stirring, of a breath that had lain still for centuries, now struggling to claim its place in a world utterly transformed. The first full breath was a sound that scraped against the cabin's quiet, a harsh, guttural rasp that seemed to tear through the fabric of time itself. It was followed by a low, almost imperceptible groan, a sound of profound disorientation. Alara watched, transfixed, as his eyelids fluttered, then slowly, painstakingly, opened. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, were clouded with a deep, ancient confusion, lacking focus, mirroring the profound disarray of a being dragged from an impossible slumber. He lay utterly still, his body, now free of the ice, unnaturally pale but intact, a stark testament to the preserving power of the glacial tomb. The world, as he knew it, was gone, replaced by the unfamiliar confines of her small, rustic cabin. His struggle to move was agonizingly slow, a series of weak, tremulous attempts. Each muscle seemed to protest, stiffened by centuries of immobility. Alara, sensing his terror, moved slowly, her movements deliberate, unthreatening, a silent reassurance in the face of his burgeoning bewilderment. She offered him water, a small bowl held out with a steady hand. His eyes, wide and unfocused, slowly tracked the movement, a primal instinct overriding the confusion. His hand, still cold, trembled as he took the bowl, his grip surprisingly strong for a man just resurrected. He drank, his throat working with a dry, painful effort, the water a shock to his parched system. As the water soothed his parched throat, a faint tremor of recognition, or perhaps a flicker of an ancient memory, passed through his eyes. He tried to speak, but only a series of raspy, unintelligible sounds emerged, a language lost to the winds of time. It was a guttural cry from a past irrevocably severed, a lament for worlds unseen, cultures erased. Elara, her own heart aching with a strange, empathetic pain, understood the profound isolation in his struggle. He was a ghost in a world that had forgotten him, a living artifact adrift in an ocean of unfamiliarity. As the days blurred, marked by his slow, incremental recovery, fragmented images began to surface within him, vivid and jarring, like shards of broken glass. He saw a vast, sprawling land, teeming with life, a tribal council fire, the shimmer of a river, the distant rumble of bison herds. He saw faces, etched with love and loyalty, faces that were now dust. And always, the crushing, inescapable cold, the blinding snow, the frantic, desperate flight. He remembered the pursuit, the betrayal, the final, desperate dash into the unforgiving storm, the silent surrender to the white embrace. The memory, a cruel, beautiful phantom, brought a low, pained moan from his lips, a mournful sound that filled the small cabin, a raw echo of a world lost forever. Word, as it inevitably does, has a way of slithering through the most impenetrable mountain passes, carried on the breath of trappers, hunters, and the occasional desperate prospector seeking refuge from the encroaching winter. The whisper, initially dismissed as the ramblings of a solitary woman driven mad by isolation, soon gained a disturbing tenacity. A frozen man, resurrected, living in Alara's cabin? It was a tale too outlandish to ignore, too compelling not to investigate. The first visitors arrived like vultures drawn to a fresh kill. A grizzled, suspicious trapper named Silas, whose eyes held a perpetual distrust of anything new, and a self-appointed town elder, Martha, whose piety was as rigid as her back, armed with judgments and a Bible clutched tight. They came not with concern, but with a potent mix of fear, curiosity, and a deep-seated suspicion, their faces etched with the familiar biases that Alara had sought to escape. They saw not a miracle, but an anomaly, a threat, a dark magic woven into the quiet fabric of their conservative mountain community. Their questions were blunt, their gazes hostile, dissecting Alara with the cold precision of a surgeon's knife. "What is he, woman? Where did he come from? Is this some kind of unholy abomination?" Their fear, a contagion, spread quickly. The warrior, still weak, still grappling with the monumental shock of his revival, was a silent, imposing figure in their midst. His dark eyes, though still clouded by a profound ancient grief, held a quiet intensity that unnerved them. His silence was interpreted as menace, his unfamiliarity as a direct challenge. Alara, caught between his vulnerability and their hostility, felt the familiar walls of her own past mistakes begin to crumble around her. The whispers about her own troubled history, the unspoken condemnations that had driven her to this solitary existence, began to resurface. She was the odd one out, the outsider, and now she was harboring another. The cabin, once her sanctuary, transformed into a besieged fortress. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of centuries of prejudice, with the profound chasm between their understanding and the impossible reality before them. The tension, thick and suffocating, pressed in, threatening to crush the fragile life that had just begun to stir within the ancient warrior. She was not merely protecting him from the elements now, but from the encroaching shadow of human fear and its destructive judgment. The mountain, once a silent confidant, now seemed to echo with the rising tide of fear, threatening to sweep them both away. Then, on the 5th day after his thawing, a moment of profound, unsettling clarity pierced through the warrior's fragmented reality. He had been quiet, observing Alara with a gaze that slowly sharpened, moving from a distant, ancient confusion to an unnerving focus. The air in the cabin, already taut with unspoken fears and the lingering presence of the mountain community's suspicion, thickened further. He sat upright on the furs Alara had laid out for him, his body still frail but imbued with a sudden, startling presence. His eyes, no longer clouded, fixed on her, and for the first time, held a flicker of something ancient and knowing. His voice, when it came, was a raw, resonant whisper, a language Alara couldn't understand, yet the cadence, the emotional intensity, held her captive. He spoke of visions, of ice and fire, of the sacred earth, and then he pointed to her face, his gaze unwavering, his hand trembling slightly. "You," he rasped, the words slicing through the quiet, a language she strangely comprehended through its sheer force. "I saw your face in the vision before the ice claimed me." His words were a blunt, terrifying affirmation, a direct accusation from the depths of time. Alara's blood ran cold. The impossible had just become even more deeply, terrifyingly personal. How could he have seen her face? A face that wouldn't exist for centuries, in a vision that predated her very existence. The sheer audacity of his claim, the impossible confluence of past and present, struck her like a physical blow. Her mind reeled, grasping for a rational explanation, but there was none. Logic dissolved in the face of such profound, temporal blasphemy. Was it madness? A hallucination brought on by his ordeal? Or was it something far more profound? A chilling revelation of a destiny inextricably woven, a thread pulled taut across the vast loom of time. A powerful unease, both terrifying and undeniably alluring, settled over her. The claim wasn't just about him. It was about her. It stripped away her carefully constructed solitude, pulling her into a narrative far grander and far more perilous than she could have ever imagined. The tension, already a live wire, now hummed with a dizzying new frequency. He had claimed her face, not with malice, but with the quiet certainty of ancient prophecy. And in that moment, the world inside her cabin, and within her, fractured. The chill of the mountain now seemed to echo the deeper, more profound cold of a fate revealed, a chilling premonition of a shared path, one that would redefine both their existences. The warrior's unsettling declaration hung in the air, a spectral thread weaving through the mundane reality of the cabin, connecting Alara to an unimaginable past. His name, he later uttered, was Kale, a sound like a stone skipping across a frozen lake. He was Black Shoshone, his tribe's legacy etched into the very fabric of the land they had once called home. The attempts to understand him were a delicate dance between their two worlds, a profound chasm of language, custom, and time separating them. Alara, with her own heavy burden of unspoken regret, found herself drawn into his narrative, not just as a caretaker, but as an unwitting confessor. He spoke in a blend of guttural sounds and startlingly clear images, his mind still a shattered mirror reflecting centuries of sleep. Through his fragmented memories, pieced together with Alara's intuition and desperate need to comprehend, a horrifying tale began to emerge. A brutal betrayal, a devastating ambush, the decimation of his people, not by the pale-faced encroachers he had heard whispers of, but by a rival tribe, fueled by jealousy and greed. His vision of her face, he explained with a quiet intensity that brooked no doubt, came in the moments before the ice claimed him. A desperate plea for guidance, a desperate hope for a future. He had seen a face, not of his own kind, but one that radiated a strange, protective light, a beacon in the storm. It was a face that promised refuge, a brief, fleeting glimpse of sanctuary. This wasn't merely a personal prophecy. It was a revelation that burdened her with an immense, unforeseen responsibility. The news of his revival, amplified and distorted by the growing fear of the nearby settlement, had escalated into a full-blown crisis. Silas, the suspicious trapper, returned with more men, their faces grim, their hands resting on the worn handles of their hunting rifles. They were not just curious now. They were terrified, driven by the ingrained prejudices of a closed-off community. The warrior, an Indian from a savage past, was seen as an omen, a curse, an embodiment of ancient fears and unresolved conflicts. He was a threat to their perceived order, a living ghost of a forgotten world. The air outside Ilara's cabin hummed with unspoken accusations, with the deep-seated societal biases that had, ironically, also driven Ilara to this isolation. The collective fear was a palpable entity, a heavy cloak draped over the entire valley, threatening to smother any flicker of hope or understanding. This was no longer just about Kale's impossible revival. It was about the clash of two worlds, two timelines, two profoundly different understandings of existence, converging violently at Ilara's small, vulnerable doorstep. The silence of the cabin now held the ominous weight of approaching storm, its ancient calm shattered by the encroaching shadows of human judgment. The growing suspicion from the surrounding community hardened into an undeniable threat, pressing against the fragile peace of Ilara's cabin like a winter gale. The repeated visits from Silas and his ilk, now less inquisitive and more overtly menacing, left Ilara feeling increasingly exposed, her sanctuary turning into a cage. Their words, laced with accusations of witchcraft and unholy alliances, were flung at her like stones, chipping away at her resolve. She was no stranger to judgment, having carried the burden of past mistakes that had driven her to this remote existence. Her own moral compass, already fractured, began to spin wildly under the weight of this impossible situation. Was she truly helping Kyle? Or was she, by harboring him, merely fulfilling some unknown ancient destiny, perhaps even one that could bring harm? The warrior, Kyle, was slowly regaining strength, his body healing, his senses reawakening to a world that overwhelmed and alienated him. Yet, a deep, abiding sadness clung to him, a profound sorrow for the loss of his people, his time, his entire existence. His silence, once a sign of his weakness, now held a formidable, quiet dignity. He observed her, his dark eyes intelligent and discerning, piercing through her guarded demeanor to the vulnerable core she tried so desperately to hide. He sensed her past, the burden of her shame, the self-inflicted isolation. He was an ancient mirror, reflecting her own deep flaws with a profound, unspoken understanding. One bitterly cold evening, a desperate decision loomed. Silas had issued an ultimatum, his voice rough with suspicion and fear. Surrender the warrior, or face the consequences. His words hung in the air, a chilling promise of escalating violence. Ilara knew she could not fight them, not truly. Her own safety was secondary. It was Kale's impossible life that hung in the balance. A brutal choice presented itself: betray Kale and surrender him to their judgment, or risk everything she had left, her very life, to protect him. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had come to these mountains to escape her own moral ambiguities, only to find herself trapped in an even deeper ethical labyrinth. Kale, sensing the gravity of her internal conflict, placed a hand on her arm, his touch surprisingly warm despite the cold. He spoke, not in his fragmented old tongue, but with a guttural, instinctive plea in a language she understood. "Leave me. Save yourself." His willingness to sacrifice himself for her, a stranger from an alien future, struck her with a profound, almost unbearable force. It was an act of unexpected grace from a man who had lost everything. Her own heart, long hardened by self-preservation, softened in that moment, shattering the walls she had built around it. The choice, stark and agonizing, was laid bare. To abandon him would be to abandon the last vestiges of her own humanity, to succumb to the very judgment she had tried to flee. To protect him, she would have to make a sacrifice, not of her life, but of her carefully constructed anonymity, of her quiet, self-imposed oblivion. The true battle, she realized with a cold certainty, was not against the men outside, but within the landscape of her own soul, where the lines between right and wrong, between her past and her future, blurred into a terrifying, impossible choice. The impending confrontation cast a long, chilling shadow over the valley. Silas and his increasingly agitated group, now numbering a dozen, positioned themselves around Ilara's cabin, their lanterns glowing like malevolent eyes in the deepening twilight. The air crackled with a palpable tension, a volatile mix of fear, ignorance, and the ingrained prejudice of men who saw anything outside their understanding as a direct threat. They were a microcosm of the societal biases Ilara had always tried to avoid, now brought to her very doorstep. Inside, The silence was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the ragged beat of Alara's own heart. Cale, sensing the imminent danger, stood beside her, his body still healing, but his stance resolute, his gaze fixed on the door. He was a warrior, centuries removed from his battlefield, yet the instincts of his people flowed through his veins. His dark eyes, now sharp and clear, held a profound sorrow for the inevitable clash, yet also an unwavering readiness. His past, once a haunting whisper, was now a thundering drumbeat within him, urging him to face this alien threat. Alara looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just a man resurrected from the ice, but a being of immense ancient dignity, a symbol of resilience against impossible odds. The flaws she saw in herself, the moral ambiguity she carried, faded in the fierce light of his unwavering resolve. She felt a profound connection, a bond forged in shared vulnerability, an unspoken understanding, transcending the vast chasm of time that separated them. The truth of her own fractured past, the reasons for her isolation, no longer mattered as much as the present moment, the immediate, overwhelming need to protect this impossible life. A harsh voice, Silas's, cut through the night, demanding Cale's surrender, threatening to burn the cabin to the ground. "Give us the heathen, woman, or face the consequences." The words were like flint against stone, sparking a dangerous fury in Alara. She stepped forward, her hand instinctively resting on the cold metal of her rifle. But Cale, with a sudden, decisive movement, stepped in front of her, shielding her. He lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting the hostile glow of the lanterns, a silent challenge in his gaze. He spoke, his voice surprisingly strong, a torrent of ancient words that were incomprehensible to Silas and his men, yet carried an undeniable power, a resonant warning that vibrated in the cold night air. His words were a lament, a defiance, a profound assertion of his ancient right to exist. It was a language of earth and spirit, a profound rejection of their narrow, fearful world. The tension reached its breaking point. The men outside shifted, their fingers tightening on their rifles. Alara knew, with a chilling certainty, that the true battle was about to begin, not just for Cale's life, but for the very soul of this isolated place, for the fragile thread of hope that had begun to mend her own fractured spirit. The silence of the mountain was broken by the growing clamor of human fear, the ominous click of a rifle hammer, and the stark, chilling promise of violence that now hung, thick and suffocating, over Alara's small, defiant cabin. The pivotal moment arrived, not with the roar of violence, but with a chilling, resonant silence that preceded the storm. Cale, still standing defiant before the cabin door, lowered his head, his gaze sweeping over the ring of men. The ancient words he had spoken earlier, though incomprehensible, had a profound, unsettling effect, a language beyond their understanding, but one that resonated with something primal. His movements were deliberate now, his previous frailty replaced by a strange, almost ethereal strength. He began to chant, a low, guttural hum that slowly built in intensity, a melodic lament imbued with raw power. The air around him shimmered, growing colder, carrying the faint scent of ozone and something akin to ancient earth. Frost began to spiderweb across the cabin window panes, not from the outside cold, but from within, emanating from Cale himself. The men outside recoiled, their fear morphing into sheer terror. This was not the savage they expected. This was something otherworldly, something born of the very earth they stood upon, and yet beyond their comprehension. Silas, his face pale with a dawning horror, raised his rifle, but his hand trembled uncontrollably. Cale, his eyes now glowing with an inner luminescence, extended a hand, not in aggression, but in a profound, almost sorrowful gesture. A vision, unseen by the men, flashed through Alara's mind. A vast, frozen plain, a sky ablaze with ancient spirits, Cale standing alone, accepting his fate. He was not fighting them. He was showing them the truth of his impossible existence, the very essence of the life they so desperately wanted to extinguish. The climax was not a physical battle, but a spiritual one. A profound clash between ancient power and modern fear. The cold intensified, pressing in, an invisible, crushing weight. The men outside gasped, a collective sound of primal terror, as ice crystals began to form on their very garments. not from the outside, but from the chilling aura Kyle now emitted. It was a silent, unyielding demonstration of his profound connection to the land and the ice that had preserved him. Ilara watched, transfixed, her breath fogging in the rapidly chilling air. She understood then, with a chilling clarity, that Kale was not simply a man, but a vessel, a living memory of a past that refused to be forgotten. The energy radiating from him was overwhelming, a raw, undeniable force of nature. The men, unable to bear the inexplicable phenomenon, broke ranks, scattering into the night, their terrified shouts echoing back from the forest. Silas, abandoning his rifle, stumbled away, a broken man, his beliefs shattered, his fear a gaping wound. The immediate danger had passed, but the encounter had irrevocably changed everything. The silence that settled back into the cabin was profound, heavy with the weight of the impossible, the echoes of ancient power. KL, exhausted, collapsed, his eyes closing, his form shimmering as if fading, a fragile ghost against the impossible reality. Ilara rushed to him, her heart aching with a complex mix of relief and a dawning, terrifying understanding. The battle was over, but the world, and her own fractured spirit, had been fundamentally reshaped. The aftermath of Kael's ethereal display was a silence more profound than any Ilara had ever known, a stillness heavy with the lingering chill of ancient power. The men, their fear-driven rage replaced by a primal terror, had fled, their scattered footsteps quickly swallowed by the snow. The cabin, once a place of besieged vulnerability, now felt imbued with a strange, almost sacred quiet, a testament to the impossible events that had transpired within its walls. Kael lay motionless, drained by the immense energy he had expended, his breathing shallow, a fragile thread connecting him to this bewildering present. Ilara knelt beside him, her own body trembling, not from cold, but from the residual shock of witnessing such raw, inexplicable force. She watched him, a strange, undeniable reverence swelling within her. He was not just a man, but a conduit, a living embodiment of the Earth's ancient memory, a bridge to a past that defied the very fabric of linear time. The prophecy, the vision of her face, no longer seemed a chilling premonition, but a profound connection, a shared destiny etched into the very core of their beings. The immediate danger had passed, yet the landscape of her own soul had been irrevocably altered. Her past, once a suffocating shroud of regret, now felt distant, almost irrelevant. The shame that had driven her to this isolation dissolved in the face of this monumental truth, replaced by a clarity born of profound empathy and a nascent, fierce hope. She understood, truly understood, that her purpose here was no longer to simply endure or forget, but to protect, to bear witness, and to learn. The world, her world, had expanded, shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments, only to coalesce into something far grander, far more complex. She was no longer just a solitary woman seeking solace. She was a guardian, a reluctant keeper of an ancient, impossible secret. The dawn, when it finally arrived, was a hesitant, muted light, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of soft gray and pale pink. The silence outside was complete, a blanket laid over the valley, burying the echoes of human fear. But within the cabin, a different kind of silence hummed, one filled with unspoken understanding, with the quiet promise of a future yet unwritten. Ilara looked at Kael, his face serene in repose, and a profound sense of peace settled over her. The hope, fragile but undeniably present, was not for a return to normalcy, but for the courage to navigate this new, impossible reality, to embrace the profound and beautiful strangeness that had been thrust upon her. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with peril and misunderstanding, but she was no longer alone, no longer running from the shadows of her past. She was walking towards an unimaginable future, hand in hand with a man who had claimed her face in a vision centuries before she drew her first breath. A journey into the heart of an impossible ancient prophecy. The days that followed the exodus of the fearful men unfolded with a quiet, almost sacred rhythm. The cabin, once a symbol of Ilara's self-imposed exile, now hummed with a different energy, a delicate balance between the ancient spirit of Kael and the raw vulnerability of their shared existence. Kyle, slowly recovering his strength, moved with a newfound grace, his dark eyes observing Ilara with a depth of understanding that transcended words. He spoke less of his past, more of the present, his ancient wisdom filtering through his fractured language, revealing glimpses of a profound connection to the land and the spirits he revered. His touch, though still rare, carried a strange warmth, a quiet reassurance that burrowed deep into Ilara's guarded heart. She, in turn, found herself shedding the layers of cynicism and self-pity that had defined her for so long. The mountains, once a mere escape, became a teacher, their silent wisdom reflecting the profound lessons she was learning from Kale. She began to see the world through his eyes, the intricate dance of life and death in the forest, the whispers of the wind carrying ancient stories, the profound interconnectedness of all things. Her flawed nature, the mistakes that had haunted her, no longer seemed to define her. She was simply Ilara, a woman who had pulled a frozen warrior from the ice, and, in doing so, had unwittingly pulled herself from the ice of her own despair. The small, isolated community, once so quick to judge, now largely left them alone, their fear of Kale's inexplicable power outweighing their prejudice. They were a living legend, a strange, unreadable anomaly. The narrative of her life, once a tragedy, was transforming into something far more complex and beautiful. A story of unexpected connection and profound redemption. There was no grand resolution, no tidy ending. The world had not suddenly become perfect, nor had all the mysteries been solved. But the dark, suffocating weight of her past had lifted, replaced by a quiet, resilient hope. The relationship between Ilara and Kale was one of profound understanding, born not of words, but of shared experience, of a silent acknowledgement of the impossible thread that bound them. She no longer sought escape, she sought understanding. She no longer feared judgment. She embraced the profound strangeness of her destiny. The future remained uncertain, an open loop stretching into the vast, unknown expanse of the mountains. But for the first time in a long time, Ilara faced it not with dread, but with a quiet, unwavering strength. Her spirit aligned with the ancient rhythm of the land and the beating heart of a man who had seen her face in a vision centuries before she was born. The snow, a silent, relentless architect, began to reshape the world outside the cabin, blanketing the peaks and valleys in an unbroken expanse of white. Winter's true grip had descended, isolating Ilara and Kale further. Yet their solitude no longer felt like a punishment, but a profound sanctuary. Within the rough-hewn walls, a fragile new existence had taken root, nurtured by a shared understanding that deepened with each passing day. Kyle, fully recovered now, moved with the quiet dignity of a man reconnected to his primeval strength, his movements fluid and purposeful. He taught Ilara of the ancient ways, of tracking game by the faint whispers of the wind, of reading the secrets etched into the bark of trees, of understanding the subtle language of the wild. He spoke, in a blend of his native tongue and the few words of hers he had meticulously absorbed, of the reverence his people held for the earth, of the sacred cycles of life and death, of the spirits that resided in every stone and every stream. His lessons were not just about survival, they were about belonging, about finding one's place in the vast, indifferent tapestry of existence. Ilara, in turn, shared glimpses of her world, a world Kyle struggled to comprehend, the endless hum of machines, the towering cities of glass and steel, the relentless rush of a life disconnected from the rhythms of nature. He listened with a quiet, often sorrowful, intensity, his eyes reflecting the profound chasm between their two eras, a chasm that was nonetheless bridged by the unique connection between them. The narrative of her past, the choices that had scarred her, began to lose their sharp edges, softening into a landscape of experience rather than regret. The irony was not lost on her. She had sought to escape humanity, only to find her truest humanity reflected in the ancient wisdom of a man from a forgotten age. Her initial fear of Kale, of the impossible reality he represented, had transformed into a deep, abiding respect, a kinship of spirit that defied logic and time. The quiet solitude of their days was punctuated by moments of profound shared silence, moments where words were superfluous, where the ancient echoes of his vision and her present reality merged into a singular, undeniable truth. There was a quiet strength in their bond, a resilience forged in the face of the impossible, a testament to the enduring power of connection. The cold embrace of winter had become a canvas for their evolving story, a backdrop against which the subtle, yet profound, shifts in their lives unfolded. The future remained a vast, unknown wilderness, but the present moment, within the warmth of their small cabin, held a profound and unexpected grace, a testament to the quiet, transformative power of two souls, separated by centuries, finding an unexpected, indelible solace in each other's presence. The relentless march of winter, however, brought with it a different kind of tension, a subtle, rhythmic tightening that mirrored the increasing scarcity of game and the deepening snowdrifts. The initial awe and fear from the neighboring community had solidified into a wary distance, but a few, emboldened by their own desperation or by a lingering resentment, still posed a potential threat. Whispers of the Iceman and the Witch Woman continued to circulate, festering beneath the surface of the valley's isolation. Ilara knew their precarious peace was fragile, a delicate balance poised on the edge of a precipice. Kale, despite his immense spiritual power, remained a mortal being, vulnerable to the elements and to the persistent prejudice of those who refused to understand. His ancestral knowledge of the land, while profound, was sometimes challenged by the changed patterns of a modern, warming world. The irony was stark. He, a man who had mastered survival in his own time, was now reliant on Ilara for understanding the subtle, yet crucial differences of this transformed landscape. Their roles, fluid and interdependent, were constantly shifting. One particularly harsh morning, with the cabin nearly buried under fresh snow, a lone figure appeared on the horizon, a silhouette against the blinding white. It was Martha, the rigid elder, her face etched with a desperate weariness, a stark contrast to her previous self-righteous demeanor. Her appearance, an act of sheer, desperate courage, spoke volumes. Her youngest child was gravely ill, plagued by a fever that medicine could not touch, a sickness she now, in her desperation, attributed to the very spirits Kale embodied. She came not to judge, but to plead, her fear momentarily overshadowed by a mother's primal need. It was a confrontation, not of fists, but of deeply ingrained belief systems and a raw human vulnerability. Kyle, sensing the shift in the air, stepped forward, his eyes, usually so serene, holding a flicker of ancient sadness. He understood human suffering, the universal ache of loss, transcending the barriers of time and culture. This was their pivotal moment, the emotional climax that would either shatter their fragile sanctuary or solidify its enduring strength. The world, beyond the cabin's walls, held its breath, awaiting their decision. Ilara looked from Martha's tear-streaked face to Kale's stoic, knowing gaze. The choice was not merely about healing a child, it was about confronting the deep-seated prejudices that had kept them isolated, about offering a hand of understanding in a world steeped in fear, about proving that ancient wisdom and modern compassion could, perhaps, forge a new path forward. The tension was palpable, a live wire humming between two worlds, the future of their impossible bond hanging in the balance, a desperate plea echoing through the still, cold air. The air in the cabin grew heavy, thick with the weight of Martha's desperate plea and the centuries of unspoken conflict that her presence symbolized. Ilara looked at Kyle, whose dark eyes, filled with an ancient, profound empathy, held no judgment for Martha, only a deep understanding of her suffering. He had witnessed such pain in his own time, had understood the universal ache of a parent's fear. Without a word, he moved towards Martha, his steps quiet but resolute. Martha, despite her fear, remained rooted, her gaze fixed on him, a flicker of bewildered hope battling with her ingrained terror. Kyle knelt before the distraught woman, a warrior from a forgotten age offering solace to a woman of this modern, fractured world. He reached out, his hand, dark and strong, gently placed on her feverish child's brow. He began to hum, a low, melodic chant, a sound that resonated with the deep vibrations of the earth, a mournful, ancient song that seemed to weave through the very fabric of the cabin. The air shimmered around them, carrying the scent of pine and something else, something primal and healing. Ilara watched, transfixed, as a faint, almost imperceptible light seemed to emanate from Kyle's hand, a soft glow that pulsed with a deep, ancient power. Martha gasped, not in fear, but in awe, as her child's racking cough began to subside, his feverish skin slowly cooling under Cale's touch. The resolution was not sudden, not miraculous in the way of a fairy tale, but a gradual, profound release of tension, a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. The child, after long moments, stirred, his eyes fluttering open, his breathing even and calm. He was not instantly cured, but the suffocating grip of the illness had undeniably loosened. Martha, tears streaming down her face, looked at Cale with a reverence that transcended her previous prejudice. Her rigid piety had finally bent under the weight of undeniable, inexplicable grace. This was the pivotal emotional climax, not a battle of wills, but a profound act of compassion, a testament to the enduring power of ancient wisdom meeting raw human need. Cale, exhausted but resolute, rose, his gaze meeting Alara's across the small cabin. In that moment, a profound understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the bridge they had built, not just between their two worlds, but between fear and acceptance, between the past and a nascent, fragile future. The mountain outside continued its silent watch, but the air within the cabin now hummed with a different energy, one of peace, of profound connection, of a hopeful, if still uncertain, path forward. The dark shadow of the past had not been erased, but had been illuminated by the quiet, transformative power of compassion, leaving behind an indelible mark on both their lives, forever bound by the chilling vision and the healing touch.